I sat across from a man worth $400 million and watched him cry like a child who had just lost his mother. He was not crying because he lost money. He was not crying because his business was failing. He was not crying because of a lawsuit or a scandal or a health scare. He was crying because his youngest daughter had changed her phone number for the third time that year, and he had no way to reach her. He did not know where she lived. He did not know if she was married. He did not know if he had grandchildren. All he knew was that she wanted nothing to do with him, and that the last words she ever spoke to him were, "You made everything in your life more important than me, and I am done waiting for that to change." He sat in my office in a suit that cost more than most people make in a month, and he could not stop his hands from shaking. And I remember thinking to myself, this is the image no one ever sees. This is the part of wealth that never makes it into the magazines or the interviews or the documentary profiles. A man who built an empire but cannot get his own child to answer a phone call. That was 11 years ago. And in the years since, I have sat with hundreds of families just like his. Families who have more money than they could spend in 5 lifetimes, but who are falling apart in ways that would shock most people. I have seen fathers who turned their children into employees, mothers who used money as a replacement for presents, siblings who went from best friends to courtroom enemies over an inheritance they did not even need. I have seen marriages dissolve not because of betrayal or abuse, but because wealth created a life so comfortable that neither person had a reason to need the other. And once you stop needing someone, you start forgetting why you chose them in the first place. I have spent my entire career working with affluent families, not because they are more important than anyone else, not because their pain is somehow more valid, but because I realized very early in my work that money does something to families that almost no one talks about honestly. It does not just change what you have, it changes who you are to the people closest to you. It changes what your children believe about love. It changes what your spouse expects from the relationship. It changes the power dynamics in ways that are almost impossible to reverse once they take hold. And the hardest part is that it does all of this so slowly and so quietly that by the time a family realizes what has happened, the damage is already generational. I want to talk about that, not from a place of judgment, not from a place of envy or resentment, but from a place of honesty. Because I have been inside the rooms where these conversations happen. I have heard the confessions. I have seen the patterns. And I can tell you with absolute certainty that money by itself does not destroy families. But what money does to the people inside those families, if it is not handled with extreme awareness and intention, will tear them apart every single time. The first thing I need people to understand is that wealth does not arrive alone. It always brings a companion, and that companion is distance. Not physical distance, although that often happens too. I am talking about emotional distance, psychological distance, the kind of distance that grows so gradually that no one notices it until it has already become the defining feature of the family. Let me explain what I mean. When a person begins to accumulate serious wealth, their life changes in ways that go far beyond the material. Their time becomes more scarce. Their responsibilities multiply. Their social circle shifts. The people they interact with daily begin to treat them differently. They are no longer just a parent or a spouse or a sibling. They become a source, a resource, a decision maker, a provider on a scale that changes how everyone around them relates to them. And this is where the first crack always forms. Because when your role inside your family shifts from person to provider, something very dangerous happens. People stop telling you the truth. They start telling you what they think you want to hear. Your children learn very early that your mood determines the temperature of the household, so they learn to manage you rather than connect with you. Your spouse starts handling problems alone because they know your mind is somewhere else, and they do not want to add to your burden. Or worse, they do not want to deal with the version of you that comes out when you are stressed. And here is the part that breaks my heart every time I see it. The person at the center of all of this usually has no idea it is happening. They genuinely believe that everything is fine. They see a beautiful house. They see children in good schools. They see vacations and comfort and a spouse who seems content. And they mistake the absence of visible conflict for the presence of genuine connection. But those are not the same thing. A family can be completely silent and completely broken at the same time. In fact, in my experience, the quietest families are almost always the most fractured, because the silence is not peace, it is resignation. Everyone has simply stopped trying. I had a client once, a woman who built a cosmetics company from her kitchen table into a brand worth over $200 million. She came to me because her two adult sons had not spoken to each other in 6 years, not because of a fight, not because of a betrayal, but because she had spent their entire childhood pitting them against each other without even realizing it. She would compare their grades. She would compare their ambition. She would tell one son what the other was achieving as a way to motivate him, and she genuinely believed she was being a good mother. She thought she was pushing them to be their best, but what she was actually doing was teaching them that love in her household was a competition, that there was only enough approval for one of them at a time, and by the time they were adults, they could not be in the same room without feeling like the other person was a threat. When I explained this to her, she was devastated. She kept saying, "But I gave them everything. I gave them the best schools, the best opportunities, the best life I could possibly provide." And I had to look at her and say, "Yes, you gave them everything except the one thing they actually needed, which was the feeling that they were enough on their own, that they did not have to earn your love by outperforming their brother, that your pride in them was not conditional on being better than someone else." She sat there for a long time after I said that, and then she said something I will never forget. She said, "I raised them the way I built my company. I treated motherhood like a business. I measured outcomes. I tracked performance. I rewarded results. And I never once stopped to ask if any of them were happy." That is one of the most common patterns I see in wealthy families. The parent who builds their fortune through discipline and strategy and relentless performance, and then applies that exact same framework to their family. They run their household like a corporation. There are expectations and benchmarks and consequences. There is very little room for failure, very little room for vulnerability, very little room for a child to simply be a child without the pressure of becoming something impressive. And the damage this causes is profound, because children who grow up in that environment learn something very specific about what love means. They learn that love is transactional, that it must be earned, that it can be lost if you do not perform. And they carry that belief into every relationship they ever have. They marry people they feel they need to impress. They parent their own children with the same scoreboard mentality. They build friendships based on status rather than genuine affection. And the cycle continues. I want to talk about marriage now because this is where money does some of its most devastating work. I have sat with hundreds of married couples over the years, and I can tell you that wealth does not strengthen marriages. In almost every case, it weakens them. And the reason is something most people would never guess. It is not about disagreements over spending. It is not about one partner feeling controlled by the other. The real reason money destroys marriages is that it eliminates the need for partnership. Think about what holds most marriages together at a fundamental level. It is not just love. It is interdependence. It is the fact that you need each other. You need each other to pay the bills. You need each other to raise the children. You need each other to manage the house and navigate the world and deal with the 1,000 small crises that make up a life. That need creates closeness. It creates communication. It creates the daily friction that forces two people to negotiate and compromise and ultimately grow together. Now remove all of that. Remove the financial pressure. Remove the logistical necessity. Give both people enough money that they never need to ask the other for anything. What happens? I will tell you what happens because I have watched it happen more times than I can count. The marriage becomes optional. And the moment a marriage feels optional, it becomes fragile. Because now the only thing holding it together is the choice to stay. And that choice gets tested every single day by the reality that leaving would be easy. There are no financial consequences. There are no logistical barriers. There is just the question of whether this relationship is still worth choosing. And that is an enormous amount of pressure to put on a marriage every day. I had a couple come to me once, both successful, combined net worth somewhere around 90 million. They had been married for 22 years and they told me they had not had a meaningful conversation in over 3 years. Not an argument, not a deep discussion, not even a genuine disagreement. Nothing. They lived in the same house and operated like polite strangers. She had her life, he had his. They attended events together. They shared holidays with the children. but emotionally they had been divorced for years without ever filing the paperwork. When I asked them what happened, the wife said something that stayed with me. She said, "We used to need each other. When we were young and building everything, we were a team. We had to talk, we had to plan, we had to figure things out together. And somewhere along the way, we got rich enough that we did not have to figure anything out together anymore. We could just hire someone. We could just throw money at it. And eventually, we stopped turning to each other for anything because there was always an easier solution that did not require vulnerability. That is the trap. Money provides solutions that do not require human connection. You do not need to ask your spouse for help when you can hire an assistant. You do not need to confide in your partner when you can pay for a therapist. You do not need to work through conflict when you can simply retreat to separate wings of the house and avoid each other indefinitely. Wealth gives you the ability to insulate yourself from discomfort, and marriage requires a certain amount of discomfort to stay alive. It requires the willingness to be inconvenienced by another person, to be challenged by them, to need them in ways that make you feel exposed. And when money removes all of that, what you are left with is two people who share a last name and a property portfolio, but nothing else. Now, I want to address something that I think is one of the most misunderstood aspects of wealth and family, and that is the effect it has on children. Not the children of the ultra-rich, not trust fund kids or celebrity offspring. I am talking about the children of ordinary, successful people, entrepreneurs, executives, professionals who built a comfortable life through hard work and now have enough money that their children will never experience the same struggles they did. This is where some of the deepest damage happens, and it happens because of something that sounds completely innocent. It happens because every parent with money says the same thing. I want to give my children a better life than I had. That sentence sounds beautiful. It sounds loving. It sounds like the entire point of working hard. But in practice, it often creates a disaster. Because when a parent removes every obstacle from a child's path, they also remove every opportunity for that child to develop resilience, confidence, identity, the things that come from struggling and failing and picking yourself back up. I have worked with young adults in their 20s and 30s who grew up in wealthy homes, and I can tell you that the most common thing they feel is not gratitude. It is emptiness. They have everything and they feel nothing. They have no sense of accomplishment because nothing they have was earned. They have no sense of identity because they have never been tested. They have no sense of purpose because every path was paved for them, and they never had to choose one for themselves. And underneath all of that is a quiet, devastating shame, because they know they are supposed to be happy. They know they have more than most people could ever dream of, and the fact that they still feel empty makes them feel like something is fundamentally wrong with them. I had a 26-year-old come to me once. His father was worth over $1 billion. This young man had graduated from an elite university. He had a trust fund that paid him more per month than most families earn in a year. He had traveled the world. He had dated beautiful people. He had access to anything he wanted at any time. And he sat in my chair and told me he had not felt a genuine emotion in 4 years. He said he could not tell the difference between happiness and numbness anymore. He said he woke up every morning and felt nothing. Not sadness, not joy, just a flat line where a life was supposed to be. And when we dug into it, what we found was that his entire childhood had been designed to eliminate discomfort. Every problem was solved before he felt it. Every failure was cushioned before he hit the ground. Every challenge was removed before he had the chance to face it. His parents loved him, there is no question about that. But their love expressed itself as protection, and that protection became a prison. Because by the time he was an adult, he had no idea who he was outside of his father's money. He had no internal sense of self, no earned confidence, no stories of overcoming anything. He was a person shaped entirely by comfort, and comfort alone cannot build a human being. This is what I try to help parents understand. Your children do not need a frictionless life. They need a life with enough friction to shape them. They need to feel the weight of consequences. They need to experience failure and sit with it long enough to learn from it. They need to want something and not get it and figure out how to cope with that disappointment. These are not punishments. These are the raw materials of character. And when wealth removes them entirely, what you are left with is an adult who looks complete on the outside, but is hollow on the inside. Let me talk about siblings now. Because the destruction that money causes between brothers and sisters is something I see constantly, and it never stops being painful to witness. Siblings who grew up sharing bedrooms and birthday cakes and inside jokes, and who now communicate exclusively through attorneys. It happens so often in wealthy families that I almost expect it, and the trigger is almost always the same thing: inheritance. Here is what people do not understand about inheritance. It is never about the money. I will say that again because it is critical. It is never about the money. When siblings fight over an inheritance, they are not fighting over assets. They are fighting over a question that has haunted them their entire lives. Who did mom and dad love more? That is what an unequal inheritance communicates. Not a financial decision, an emotional verdict, a final ranking. And even when the inheritance is equal, the process of dividing it forces siblings to assign monetary value to things that were never supposed to have a price. The family home, the artwork on the walls, the jewelry that belonged to their grandmother. Suddenly, these objects that held emotional meaning are being appraised and negotiated and fought over. And in that process, something sacred gets destroyed. The memory gets contaminated by the transaction. I worked with 3 siblings once, 2 brothers and a sister. Their mother had passed away and left behind an estate worth roughly $40 million. She divided it equally in her will, 1/3 to each child. You would think that would be straightforward, but it was not. Because one brother had worked in the family business for 15 years and felt he deserved a larger share. The sister had taken care of their mother during her final illness and felt she deserved recognition for that sacrifice. And the 3rd sibling had been estranged for years, and the other 2 felt he did not deserve anything at all. Within 6 months of their mother's death, these 3 people who had grown up together, who had shared holidays and vacations and the most intimate moments of their lives, were locked in a legal battle that cost each of them hundreds of thousands of dollars. And the cruelest part of all of it was that none of them needed the money. Every single one of them was already financially comfortable. They were not fighting for survival. They were fighting for validation. They were fighting to prove that they mattered more, that their sacrifice was the greatest, that their relationship with their mother was the most important, and the money was just the battlefield where that war got fought. By the time they came to me, the damage was already severe. The brothers had not spoken in over a year. The sister had cut off both of them, and all 3 of them were spending more on attorneys than the disputed portion of the estate was even worth. I remember sitting with the oldest brother and asking him what he actually wanted, not what he was suing for, what he actually wanted. And he broke down and said, "I just want to know that she was proud of me. I just want to know that the years I gave to her company meant something to her." And I thought to myself, here is a man worth tens of millions of dollars fighting a legal battle that will cost him his family, and all he really wants is to hear his dead mother say she was proud. That is what money does to families. It takes the deepest human needs, the need for love, the need for belonging, the need for validation, and it buries them under layers of transactions and negotiations and legal documents until no one can even see them anymore. The feelings are still there. The wounds are still there, but they get expressed through financial disputes because that is the language wealthy families learn to speak. They do not say, "I feel unloved." They say, "I was treated unfairly in the estate plan." They do not say, "I feel invisible." They say, "I was undervalued in the partnership agreement." The money becomes a proxy for everything they cannot bring themselves to say out loud. I want to close with something I tell every family I work with, something I believe with every part of me. Money is not evil. Wealth is not a curse. There is nothing inherently destructive about financial success. The destruction comes from the assumption that money changes nothing, that you can accumulate enormous wealth and your family will just naturally stay close, that your marriage will just naturally stay strong, that your children will just naturally develop into healthy adults, that your siblings will just naturally remain bonded. None of that is natural when money enters the equation. All of it requires deliberate, conscious, ongoing effort. The families I have seen survive wealth, and I have seen some survive it beautifully. They all share one thing in common. They talk about money openly. They talk about what it means, what it changes, what it threatens. They do not pretend that wealth is just a neutral feature of their lives. They treat it as what it actually is. which is one of the most powerful forces that will ever enter their family system. And they make conscious decisions about how to handle it. They set boundaries around it. They create rituals that have nothing to do with it. They prioritize experiences that money cannot enhance or replace. They allow their children to struggle. They invest in their marriages with the same intensity they invest in their businesses. They choose connection over convenience, even when convenience is always available. That is what it takes, not perfection, not some impossible standard of family life, just the willingness to look at money honestly and say this thing that gave us so much freedom is also the thing that could take everything from us if we are not careful. The families who say that out loud are the ones who make it. The ones who do not are the ones I see in my office 20 years later, wondering how they ended up so wealthy and so alone. I have been doing this work for a long time, and if there is one thing I know for certain, it is this. The most expensive thing a family will ever pay for is the illusion that money made them untouchable. Because by the time they realize it did not, the bill has already come due. And it is always paid in the one currency that no amount of wealth can replenish: time. The time you did not spend with your children, the time you did not invest in your marriage, the time you did not take to sit with your family and simply be together without an agenda or an objective or a transaction attached to it. That time does not come back. No matter how much money you have, it does not come back.